Welcome to 180 Degrees, brought to you by the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland and supported by the Government of Ireland. Our mission is to be at the heart of Ireland's energy revolution. In this season, we share with you the stories of people across Ireland working towards a cleaner energy future. We discuss energy efficiency in the home, electric vehicles and Ireland's charging infrastructure. Hello and welcome to Season 3 of 180 Degrees. I'm your host Louise Ryan and this is the first of 3 episodes where we explore the many benefits of driving an electric vehicle. Some obvious benefits include the cost savings on fuel and lower CO2 emissions. We'll look at this and also where to start when buying an EV and the different options available when it comes to charging your car. In this episode, we also hear from former EV sceptic Noel Griffin, who was inspired to make the switch a couple of years ago after attending a climate change event. Then I chat to 2 motoring journalists, Caroline Kidd and Neil Briscoe, who bring me up to speed about the latest in the EV market and what the future holds for Ireland's driving plans. Before we kick off, let's listen to what some EV drivers had to say when asked, what's the best thing about driving an electric car?
The best thing about having an EV is knowing that you can drive it on renewable energy, leveraging solar or energy suppliers that provide you with electricity from renewable energy.
The best thing about owning an EV is not having any idea whatsoever what the price of fuel is. We bought our EV in 2012, a Nissan Leaf, back when we were doing 50,000 kilometres a year, better than 1,000 kilometres a week, spending more than €100 a week on fuel. And from the moment we bought it, we were saving more than €200 a month.
I love driving around with the windows down and all you hear is the wind and the birds. There's no engine noise. There's no smoke. There's nothing. That's the best. It's just the serenity of the drive.
As you can hear, it seems once you switch to electric, there's no going back. Now, let's hear from Noel Griffin, who lives in County Wicklow. He recently spoke to my colleague Orla about why he switched to electric and how he's finding the change.
Noel, how long do you have your EV and is this your first one?
Hi Orla, 2 years, 2 years and 2 months I think, and it was our first EV,
And what were your motivations for buying an EV?
It had sort of been on my radar for about 5 years, and being a bit of a tech geek, I'd heard about Tesla, and my brother-in-law had a Prius about 10 years ago. The sort of closet scientist in me didn't see how that added up. But the turning point was I was invited to the opening of a company called Cool Planet about 4 years ago, and that a few heavy hitters talking about what was going on with climate change and CO2 emissions and what was coming down the tracks. And a lightning bolt went down my spinal cord as it kind of dawned on me, we're in serious trouble and there's no time for faffing around, we have to act. Now these guys were measured and balanced, there was no big stick, they weren't preaching, just giving out the data and explaining what was coming down the tracks. And what hit me that day was getting the planet to transition to EVs was the low-hanging fruit that could put the quickest, biggest dent in CO2 very, very quickly. Nothing had to be invented, it already existed, it was all proven.
Great. And after that lightning bolt, did you spend much time researching and looking at your options for a car?
I did. I had been a sort of an ultra skeptic about it. You know, I had a few friends who had EVs and they'd been evangelizing me. So I decided to do a bit of research, and YouTube is very handy, websites. But the talkers at that event, that some heavy hitters who knew their stuff, and it impressed me that their realism and the practicality of the solutions they offered.
And how did you decide what model to buy in the end?
Tesla had been on my radar, but they were ferociously expensive because the Model 3 had been announced. So I thought, I'll wait for that. But I wanted to act because I was at another event about 18 months later about alternative energy, and the impact climate change was already happening. And at that, I decided I'm getting rid of this diesel. I'm getting rid of it within weeks. I'm not waiting in next year, 3 years. So the Tesla Model 3 was on my radar, and I went up to have a look at it. They didn't have it yet in Ireland. I spoke to one of the Tesla people, and they said, look, if you're impatient and you want to move now, there's this model of car, which is very good range. And it doesn't have some of the problems that the early Generation 1 EVs had. So I left the Tesla showrooms. I went to another garage and wrote out a deposit check.
And did you look at the total cost of ownership when you were buying it?
Once I got into the process, the whole running cost, ownership was big. But initially, it was a kind of a thing. I have to get rid of this poisonous diesel. I had a series of big diesel SUVs, and I thought, never again. I just have to get rid of this as fast as I can. I'll get an electric shopping trolley if I can. And I thought I can make it work, but I don't want to have to stand on my head to make it work or to prove that EVs work. I wanted it to just be a car and just to be driven like a car so I could go where we want, when we wanted, without having to pre-plan everything.
Did you test drive any vehicles then, or did you go for the first?
I had my mind made up about that, but I went for a test drive just to be sure, but I was fairly sure I wasn't going to move. There were 3 or 4 I considered at the time. The choice was quite limited. That car was a sort of a game changer. It got some very good tech reviews from some of the more moderate YouTube reviewers and car magazines. And Ireland is a small island. You can get anywhere in 350 kilometres, even in winter. And that car could do that, because I wasn't going to stop for coffee every 40 minutes on a journey.
Just want to kind of talk about your kind of driving experience now in the car. So how have you found the transition to electric coming off the petrol or diesel? 2 words: painless and seamless. I'm not really a petrol head, I never was, but I do like a comfortable car. That's comfortable inside on a long trip, and I like a car that's not necessarily nippy, but not a lawnmower. Just has a bit of spark about it. So I was surprised at 2 things: how comfortable they are in terms of the quietness and the regenerative braking. You're just never moving your feet on the pedals. You're gaining on a car coming up in front of the motorway. You just lift off the pedal and the car backs off, which made the driving very relaxing. So would you say that's the best thing about driving electric? Well, the initial motivation was climate change, which made me obsessed with switching to electric. The secondary thing that dawned on me was the huge, massive cost savings. So having bought, the cost savings are a huge advantage. But the quietness and I think, it's just very quiet. It's very relaxing to drive. Very, very relaxing. And yet nippy, but there's a lot of stuff about electric cars have a lot of torque and they're very fast compared to equivalent ICEs. But I have a very gentle right foot. When I used to get my cars traded in the garage, I used to think I'd clock them because there was so little wear in the tyres and the brake pads. So maybe I suited EV. I'm no slouch in the traffic, but I have a gentle right foot. Tell me what your typical car use is during the week then, at weekends. Like, what kind of distances are you travelling? What journeys are you making? Well, that's transitioned a bit in the last year because I retired about 6 months ago. But when I was still commuting to work, there'd be the daily commute to work, which was about 25 kilometres, either over the mountains or on motorway. So I found when I was still working, I was only needed to charge the car twice a week. Overnight, you just didn't need to plug in every day. Now that I'm retired, I charge the car about once every 10 days. And I've got very relaxed about the charging and sort of quite happy to use the bottom 5% of the battery. Whereas at the beginning, I was a bit like we'd come back from Kerry, right, plug in immediately in case we've got to go somewhere tomorrow, But I've got much more relaxed about that now. What has been your longest, most challenging drive? Probably one January up to Donegal. I can't remember the name of the storm. It was the Storm Ivan or something like that. So we were into a very strong headwind, very, very driving rain. And ringing my ear was a friend of mine a good friend who had an EV. He'd been evangelizing me, but also sharing his tales of woe driving in winter, not being able to use the heating and driving behind trucks to slipstream and all this kind of stuff. And I thought, are we going to be in trouble here? Because there wasn't a great supply of chargers at the end of that route. But the car made it comfortably, and with 70 kilometres left range when we arrived, plug into the hotel charger. Next morning, she was back to 100%. So I thought, yeah, we'll get home. Another interesting one was we did a trip to Kenmare in February. There was a diversion because the main road was closed, so we were sent up over the mountains and there was no phone signal up there. So we felt just a little bit vulnerable climbing these steep hills. We're in an EV, so if we get in trouble, we can't phone anybody for help. But it was fine. Again, we had decent range after we arrived. It was a kind of a revelation. What's all these myths, all this bull I believed in myself about, don't use the wipers too much, don't use the lights, don't use the heating.
don't put the radio
Don't
on.
drive in rain, I think, is one of them as well. Yeah,
it's just, that was me. I was like the anti-EV 3 years ago, spouting this to my own friends who had EVs, who were trying to evangelize me.
And do you think the savings over the next few years will make it worth it, the investment?
Definitely. I mean, we're spending about €8 a week to fuel that car, whereas we used to be putting €85 a week into the diesel. Not alone that, there's nominal servicing costs. There's no oil changes, no belts, fuel filters, oil filters. The tyres seem to last a bit longer. Maybe that's something to do with the psychology of driving an EV. You're a bit gentler on the road. I mean, brake pads on an EV will last up to maybe 200,000 kilometres, because 90% of the time when you touch the brake pedal, if you do, there's no mechanical braking. The brake pads don't get used. It just switches the motor effectively into reverse, so you get a drag, a bit like driving a car down a steep hill in gear, so it doesn't run away. So the huge cost savings. Now, the cars still cost a bit more, significantly a bit more than the equivalent ICE model. I mean, the ICE equivalent of our car was, I think, €10,000 less. But we'll get that back in fuel savings and servicing cost savings.
And how have people in your life, obviously you've said some of your friends already had EVs, so they were trying to convert you, but people who didn't have an EV or hadn't witnessed one before, how have they reacted to it?
Some kind of curiosity. Oh, does that work? Or do you just drive locally? Or do you use my wife's car to go on trips as a backup? I explained, no, my car is the main car. We do all the long trips in the EV because it's comfortable, and instead of wasting €40 in diesel to get to Kerry or somewhere. Most of them were kind of surprised, tell me how it works. They had, like me, had assumed it just doesn't work. It's not viable. It's not practical. So a lot of questions, but I don't think any of them thought it was a fruitcake.
And what advice would you give someone who's thinking about buying an EV?
Don't believe all the myths out there in the media, all the stuff I believed in and I fell for. There's a huge choice on the market this year compared to even a year ago or 2 years ago. Don't be obsessed with range. My next car, whenever I change, is probably going to have less range than this one because I don't need it. And I've learned that enough is enough, and I can arrive somewhere with only 5% charge and be completely relaxed about it. Ideally, pick a car that can do 350 kilometres, because you can get anywhere in Ireland on 350 kilometres without depending on a charge en route. One thing that's different in some cars is the way regenerative braking is handled. And regenerative braking is not something I thought about before buying my car, something I discovered afterwards. It's a very relaxing way of driving that I didn't foresee. And some cars handle it automatically, and some cars allow you intervene and allow you to use paddles, where some don't. You're coming up to a roundabout and you're a bit hot on the speed. You just lift off the accelerator with the 1 foot and the car starts slowing down, but not dramatically, and you get used to that. So just decide which regenerative braking driving style you like by doing different test drives.
Okay, Noel, thank you so much for that. That was a pleasure.
Okay, so I think we've heard there that Noel is clearly converted to driving electric. And now that we've heard from a happy owner, let's see what the motoring journalists have to say. Today we're joined by Neil Briscoe, a freelance car writer who contributes to the Irish Times and Complete Car, among others, and Caroline Kidd, the founder and editor of Changing Lanes, an Irish online automotive magazine. As two people who regularly review the latest cars on the market, I want to find out their views on electric vehicles and their experiences of driving them. Welcome, Neil and Caroline. Thanks a million for joining me.
Hello, Louise.
Hello, Louise.
I just want to put this to both of you. So when did you first start reviewing and writing about electric vehicles? Can you remember even the first test drive or the first review that you did?
Yeah, well, I started reviewing cars back in 2012. And oddly enough, the first car I ever reviewed was an EV, which was quite unusual at the time because EVs were still an outlier in the market. But what I remember about that car is that it was slow, and I think you'd barely have got 100 kilometres in range in it. So how times have changed.
I can remember being brought out to Carton House at the M4 by Nissan, and they had what looked like a completely ordinary, unremarkable Nissan Tida hatchback, which was about the most ordinary and unremarkable hatchback anyone's ever built. But underneath it had the guts of the first generation Nissan Leaf in prototype form, and we were allowed to very gently trundle it around the car park a bit. And that was the first EV I ever drove, and that was when we first sort of started hearing about all the plans for EVs, charging points, percentages of sales, etc., etc. That was about must be 10 years ago now.
And in that 10 years, how have EVs changed since then, do you think, Neil?
I think they've changed. Well, first of all, they've gone from the periphery to the mainstream. I mean, every conversation in motoring now is about EVs, is about how do we get more EVs on the road? How do we make EVs more accessible for more people, for more drivers? How do we improve charging standards? It has become the conversation in motoring, and in many ways, quite rightly. I think the cars themselves have evolved out of all recognition. It's gotten to a point now where I would peg it at about 90% of the cases, I'd rather drive an EV than a petrol or diesel car now.
How about you, Caroline? What do you think? How have they changed over the last 10 years?
They have changed hugely in terms of the battery, the range, in the early days, you'd go out on a motorway and the range would drop cataclysmically, where that doesn't happen anymore. The cars feel much better on the road. They're more natural and dynamic than the early days of EVs. And also the design of the cars. They're actually models that you'd really desire, you'd like to have in your garage or outside your home.
Yeah, so there's a lot more choice now as well. I think that's something that people said, when they first came out, there was only maybe a couple of models. So there is so much more choice out there now as well, isn't there?
I think like a lot of people at the moment, myself and my wife, we would absolutely 100% buy an EV for our next car, net of being able to charge at home, which is at the moment very difficult because we live in a terraced house, and I know there are people who are plugged into this very broadcast at the moment who are having the same problem. But anyway.
So that was actually one of my next questions was, would you consider switching to an EV? How about you, Caroline? Would you buy an electric vehicle now?
I suppose the short answer for me right now is no, but I'd like to explain that. I suppose I'd like to see a culture of EVs develop so that when one leaves their home, they feel supported by the infrastructure, that they're going to be able to find a charger that works and is reliable. And you can't 100% guarantee that right now. I'd also like to see the cars become more affordable as well before I would take the jump. So I suppose I like a bargain. And right now, if I was buying a small car, I don't know if I would want to pay €7,000 or €8,000 premium to step into an electric car. I don't think, for my circumstances, that I couldn't justify that at the moment in my life.
Do you think that those changes, that electric vehicles will become more affordable in the very near future, or do you think that's something a bit further down the line?
It looks like what's happening is that there's sort of two parallel tracks going on with the cost of EVs at the moment. One is that the technology is maturing, that more and more people are making electric cars and batteries and motors and all the other bits that go with them. And therefore, the cost of producing those is coming down, because obviously that's what happens with mass production. The more you can make of stuff, the easier and cheaper it is to make. Alongside that, we're seeing increases in taxation and levies on petrol and diesel vehicles. And what the thinking at the moment is that the crossover point between those two graphs is going to be around 2026, 2027 for what one might call ordinary family cars. That's the point at which it becomes cheaper to make and therefore to sell and therefore buy a kind of 5-door family hatchback EV than it will be a petrol or diesel version. So that'll be interesting to see if those predictions come true.
And I wanted to ask you guys as well, so what are the most noticeable differences when you're driving an electric car, you're testing one, compared to a petrol or a diesel car? What's the big, for people listening who haven't driven one?
I suppose it's the silence. There's no engine noise. There's no diesel engine gurgling onto the bonnet. But there is some noise, I suppose, associated with an EV. You get like whistles and whooshes. There's some transmission noise. But again, that's certainly not an obstacle to driving one. It's actually, I suppose, it's a little bit like having your own Lewis parked outside in some way. Also, I suppose the dynamic, the way the car feels on the road. traditionally, a combustion engine car, the engine is up front, but in an EV, you've got this, I suppose, this low down weight of the battery under the passenger compartment of the car. So that does slightly affect the way the car drives. But myself and Neil would be very sensitive to that because we are motoring journalists. Most people probably wouldn't even notice those discernible differences. And certainly that even the way these EVs drive is improving all the time. Certainly the more sophisticated EVs, a lot of them, they're really fun to drive. The engineers have done a wonderful job to create the cars with the technology as it is at the moment.
I would echo that. I think there are cars like, say, the Audi e-tron GT is a particular favourite of mine. I mean, you might well say that, yeah, it should be for the, knocking on for €100,000 cost of it. But it is an exceptionally good car to drive. And I mean that in total isolation of whether it's electric or not. It is really, really good to drive. And that doesn't matter whether the power comes from the batteries. The fact that it's electric is almost incidental in the sense of driving it. I think the thing that I most like about driving an electric car, any electric car, is it's just the lack of waste. The fact that when you are trickling around town and you're stopping at traffic lights and you're getting caught up in snarls and things, you're just not wasting fuel. You're not sitting there chucking out unnecessary hydrocarbons. And I don't say that as someone who would ever count themselves as a particularly ecologically minded person. I mean, I try and I do my bit, I do my recycling and all the rest of it. But it's more about the wastefulness just in engineering terms. You're using what you need, not what you don't. And I kind of like that sensation.
Yeah, I suppose even just in terms of wasting fuel that you've paid for, even in terms of just saving money, I suppose that makes sense as well. I'd be interested as well, just obviously you're writing and reviewing electric cars all the time. What's the feedback then like from your readers, your social media followers? Is it negative? Is it positive? What's the feedback like?
I think I encounter people who are very enthusiastic about EVs, but I also encounter people who are skeptical about it. And then there's people in the middle who I think it could probably go either way, and they're thinking of what am I going to buy for my next car. So that's been my experience.
I think everybody's starting to get the message now that this is inevitable. That at some point in the next 10 years, you are going to buy an EV because that's ultimately what will be available to you, certainly if you're buying a new car. And I think people are starting to catch on to that a bit now, but definitely there is still a sensation out there for all the enthusiasm, and sometimes it can be a case of over enthusiasm for EVs from some quarters, but for all the enthusiasm, there is still a fairly significant proportion of the driving population that are looking at EV and going, it's not for me yet.
Okay, and that word yet, do you think the industry, is it progressing quickly enough? Is the technology evolving for customers' needs quickly enough?
I think that the cars themselves definitely are evolving quickly enough.
Okay.
I think we've. I don't think you can question, but that we've seen that in the last 10 years. The fact that we've gone from trundling a lashed up prototype around a car park in Carton House to, recently I was able to drive a Skoda Enyaq 80 kilowatt hour version from Dublin to my parents' house in West Cork, more or less without stopping to charge up. Couldn't have even thought of doing that 10 years ago. So the evolution of the cars is there. But I think what's holding people back is the evolution of the charging network and the infrastructure.
Yeah, I think the technology is progressing. You see the improvements in range, but also the cars are being built on these dedicated EV platforms. So there's a better use of space inside the vehicle, and consumers want a good value, spacious car, even when they're buying an EV. I think, like what Neil said, in another way, I think it's the countries and governments who aren't progressing fast enough, and that goes down to not putting in enough charging infrastructure to support people to make the switch, because I think the visibility of charge points is really important to give people confidence, to give somebody like me confidence to go and make the switch as well when that time comes.
Yeah, I think that the charging network, it's not enough for it to provide enough. It has to over provide by a significant margin. Because it has to be visible. It has to be that people who are driving around right now in petrol and diesel cars can look at it and, they'll drive past a charging point on the corner of their road and go, oh, that's there. Oh, well, maybe I can start thinking about an EV now. And I think that's hugely important, and that hasn't been done.
Okay, so infrastructure. And then I suppose, Neil, you kind of mentioned driving to West Cork. I suppose we hear a lot from people that are concerned about range.
I think the range issue has been answered in terms of the vehicles themselves. We now regularly get reasonably affordable cars. Like, again, I'll come back to the Enyaq. You look at the incoming likes of the Ford Mustang Mach-E, you look at the Tesla Model 3. Okay, they're not cheap cars by any stretch of the imagination, but they are within the wherewithal of significant numbers of buyers now. And Volkswagen's ID3 is another good example, where, the single charge range, officially at any rate, can be over 500 kilometers. And in real world terms, certainly over 400 kilometers. And that's enough for more or less anybody, as long as you can charge when you get where you're going. And that's the key, because, it isn't like a petrol car. It isn't like a diesel car. It's not just a question of being able to, because it takes so long to charge up the batteries at the moment. And hopefully advances in battery technology will change that in the coming years. But at the moment, you need to be able to charge when you need to charge. And that's a question that's not being sufficiently answered.
Okay. And what about people who would say then as well that, most people do a very short amount of journeys every day, that an electric car would suit them. They can charge at home, they can possibly charge at their workplace, and they may never need to use a public charger, maybe only on the very rare occasion when they maybe go on a staycation or something like that.
I would think that the problem there is that people are confusing the average with actually what people need. Yes, most people have a very short average daily driving level. Most people, like we do ourselves. When I'm at home here and I'm working, I'm really not driving very much. I'm doing school runs, I'm popping to the shops, things like that. So, I'm covering very short amounts of distance every day. But that's no good to me then when I do need to drive to, as I say, my parents live in West Cork. Other people's parents or whatever, they live in Galway, they live in Sligo, they live in Mayo, they live in wherever it is. And you need to get there and you need to get back again. And a car is such an expensive purchase. As everybody statistically knows, it's the second most expensive thing after your house that you will ever buy in your life. It can't be just, well, you use it for these short journeys. It has to be multi-purpose. It has to be multi-role, because that's the whole point of having a car.
Yeah, I don't think the range is as much of an issue as it was in terms of what's coming to market. There's many EVs I get into now, and the range is over 300 kilometers on the little meter, and that gives you so much confidence. And you go out on the motorway, and the battery is holding its power as well, and you're not sweating. I remember days when I was sweating in EVs on motorways, like traveling down from Dublin to Wexford, and it was just drop, drop, drop. That doesn't happen anymore in what I'm driving at the moment. So, but as Neil said, it's about those times when you're going inter-county travel. Modern life is busy. I'm a freelance writer, so my weekly schedule could be different week to week. I can't always predict it. So if I'm doing multiple trips across the country, well, I need to know that I can reliably charge at the other end. I think that's really what it comes down to. Maybe modern life is just too busy and the cars are actually fine. Maybe we just all need to slow down a bit. There's nothing wrong with the cars, but certainly we need more visible charge points that are reliable to support this uptake, because we've seen the growth in sales. People are buying EVs in greater volumes than they ever have. It's so encouraging. But if all these people go out and buy EVs in the morning, where were they going to be charged when everybody goes across country or travels home at Christmas to their families?
Okay, so the big thing is infrastructure. And would you say that you think that's the biggest barrier then to people buying it as opposed to range?
I think so at the moment. I really do. The charge points, they have to be visible, they have to be plentiful, they have to be in obvious places as well. Obviously, the motorway servicing is important. But also, I think more businesses should be installing them. It would actually make good business sense, because when people stop to charge, they'll go and spend money as well in various businesses. You've seen these charge points appearing in supermarket car parks. That's really great. So we certainly need more of that to encourage people. and the visibility of seeing other people driving EVs and charging is all going to help as we move towards the future.
There's actually quite a nice little community kind of sprouting up around EV public chargers now, and you really notice it. Or certainly I have when you're out and about and you are getting a fast charge. The downside is that almost inevitably at the moment you're having to queue. But then the upside of that is you are getting to chat to other EV owners and users, and you can start comparing notes, and people get recommendations, and people find out more about what it's like to own and live with an EV. So there is actually quite a nice sensation about that. Again, you don't necessarily want to be queuing, but at least you can meet some nice people when you do.
This is a social aspect to it. And then I just wanted to ask you both as well, the government has set a target, it's obviously very ambitious, of having 1 million EVs on our roads by 2030. Do you think the target is achievable?
I would say the short answer is no, because we would have to sell between 80 and 100,000 EVs every year. At the moment, the Irish new car market in Ireland, there's been Brexit, there's been the pandemic. We're already at about 90,000 new cars sold this year. So I think the volumes are just not large enough anyway in the new car market in Ireland. So, but that's not to put a negative spin on things. We're already at 7% of the new car market this year with sales of new EVs. That's a record. And that's really encouraging. It's going in the right direction. I can't wait to see it at 10%. And keep climbing thereafter. So, yeah, a lot done, but more to do, I suppose.
Yeah, I think mathematically it's at best an outside chance, and as Caroline says, the kind of the natural volume of the Irish car market is somewhere between 130,000 and 170,000 cars a year, and that's in a really good year. And we haven't had a really good year for a significant amount of time. So we can certainly get a lot of EVs on the road by 2030, and I don't think there's any doubt that we can achieve the stated aim of ending internal combustion engine sales by 2030, simply because we'll be piggybacking on the rest of Europe in terms of what cars are available and what cars are there to be sold, as much as any sort of banning of vehicles that might go on. But I think getting 1 million EVs on the road by then is I don't think it's going to happen. But hopefully we'll have at least a lot by then.
Yeah, a lot would be nice. And on that vein then, I just wanted to ask you, how can we encourage more people to make the switch?
I think getting people to test drive the cars, it would be really helpful, because once you've been driving an EV, I think you just very easily be converted. It's about just getting people in, driving, experiencing the car, charging. You wouldn't go back to a petrol and diesel after driving an EV. You're not going to take that backwards step. Also education. There's a lot of nomenclature around EVs, like kilowatt hour, CCS adapter. And if you've been driving a 2-litre diesel your entire life, that's not going to make immediate sense. So I think we need to help people to understand, I suppose, the terminology around the cars, and that it's just really a different power source. It's just like having an electric engine. It's nothing to be afraid of. So we just need to take the fear out of it and bust all those myths as well that seem to just pervade around the range. And that comes from the early days of EVs, when they were slow and you would struggle to get 100 kilometers, but we have moved on so much from then.
I think it's just 3 words. It's infrastructure. I think it's that visibility of the charging network, that even if you will 99% of the time be doing your charging at home and not needing to go to a public charger, you still want to be able to get to one when you really need it, and you need to get there and find it available and working, and that's absolutely critical.
Brilliant. I want to thank you both for joining me. It's been really interesting.
Thanks, Louise.
Thanks very much, Louise.
Thanks to our guests, Noel, Caroline and Neil. If you'd like to find out more about EVs and compare the different models on the market, then visit drivingelectric.ie. Our new Compare and Calculate tool also allows you to compare up to 4 cars and see how much you'll save in costs and emissions. Play around with it and see the difference in running costs of EVs compared to petrol or diesel cars. It's pretty handy. You can even input your own regular journeys and get a more accurate picture of your savings. In our next episode, we're going to talk to a car dealer who meets potential EV drivers on a daily basis and hears firsthand their concerns and curiosities when they test drive an EV. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed it, then please like, share and subscribe to our podcast. You'll find previous episodes on our website, seai.ie/podcast, along with information about our grants and supports. Until next time.